Good evening, Poultry Keepers, and welcome to another Poultry Keepers 360 show. We are happy to have you with us tonight. We have a show that we get asked about a lot, and that's how do you select poultry for production qualities? And we've got somebody here who has probably done as much about that as any of us, and that's Mandelyn Royal. Mandelyn, it's good to see you here tonight.
Nice to be here.
All right. And of course, there's Jeff and Carrie and myself here. But coming up in just a few seconds, we are going to get started. All right. So, Mandelyn, I know that you were just processing birds today and going through that whole selection process and all that. Um, what do you look for when you're wanting to improve the meat qualities of your birds?
Well, it was about a week ago we processed 23 cockerels and we do our own processing. So that gives me that view of what the living bird was like and then what that carcass was like after the fact. And I'll look at those birds and see what was the fleshing and what was I feeling when I handled that bird live. What was their structure telling me about their body capacity? What was their back end bone spacing like? Because that back end bone spacing is really important on males, just like it is on the females. And it affects their daughter's productivity for the egg portion. So I spent a lot of time on the table traits, but there's a whole other piece that happens with the pullets after point of lay. And so you guys are probably aware of the 10% retention rule for breeding stock. And I get a lot of questions where people are like, well, what 10% am I keeping at 16 weeks? Well, no, it takes a lot longer, actually. If you're going to do the dual purpose thing, you're not getting to that 10% until they're a year and a half, 2 years old.
Yeah.
And you have to take a staggered approach to it while also monitoring your feed efficiency and your space and your housing. So when those birds are getting to be 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks, I blow through those cockerels and look for who I definitely don't need. And then they give me my notes on carcass qualities and what my birds for more grow out need to feel like to know that they're going to be that same table yield, but in a breeding pen.
Okay. I got a question for you. In your birds, which do you find it easier to select through, the males or the females?
Both are pretty straightforward, but I do struggle a little bit with being as harsh on the females as the males. And I just console myself that they can always make breakfast eggs and to not force them into a breeding pen.
You were talking earlier that the pin bone spacing in the rear was just as critical for egg production as it is for meat production.
Yeah. If you
Uh,
process your own birds and they're real tight on the back end and you have to cut up both sides to get the innards out because there's just not enough of an opening to get your hand inside. So that's pretty inconvenient from just the table side of it. But then what they're passing on to their female offspring for their rate of lay. So like on the males, when they're 12, 14 weeks old, I'm already expecting them to have, it's not a very technical measurement tool. I'm just use my hands. So at least 2 fingers wide in between the pin bones and then 3 fingers from the end of the keel up to where those pin bones are. And then it just improves with additional age from there. But that's like my minimum threshold for it.
Do you use that same measurement and same expectations on males and females?
Definitely for the males. The females, I would expect them to be just a little bit more. And then when they go into active lay and they're into production, then usually you can add another finger onto that. And then when they fall out of production, you can lose a finger because the females have like a flexing capability for when they're in or out of active lay.
Take us through your process for evaluating your birds, kind of a step by step, blow by blow thing.
So when I first pick them up, I look for that heft because you can tell right off if you pick up a skinny bird, it's going to feel like nothing but fluff in your hands. So when I pick them up, I'm just looking for that density. And then when I set them on a scale to get their weight, I'm not going into that with a set weight in mind, since I have been playing around with feed and I have been playing around with my methodology and figuring out what works. I don't have a rigid weight for them, but I compare them against their peers. So I'll weigh every bird in that batch, and then I let them stand on the scale, because they're pretty docile. Like, I don't have to fight with them. I don't have to put them in a pillowcase and hang them from a fish scale or anything. I just stand them there, and they stand there and look back at me, and then I watch how they behave, and I watch how they step off that scale, how they walk around, how their legs are tied into their body, where they're positioned at, how they're carrying themselves. And then after that, I'll grab them back in my hands again and start really feeling on them and checking out their skull shape all the way down to their back, checking the length, checking the depth, the width. But then I put them back down and watch them move around again. And my sort cage has 3 holes. So however I fill those 3 holes, it could be good, better, best. It could be the worst bird I've seen this season, and then everyone else that was better. And it almost seems pretty consistent that I'll find, let's say I've got 15 boys, I'll find 2 that check all the boxes. I'll find another 5 or 6 that are actually pretty okay, but they got beat out by the other 2. And the other ones aren't in the same ballpark of quality that those other ones are. And that way I know how many dinner birds I have right off the bat, and I can go ahead and set them up for finishing. As soon as I know I don't need them and they're of size, I'm usually looking for them to be a minimum of 5 pounds up to 7 pounds for processing when they're between like 14 weeks, 16 weeks, for texture's sake. The longer you wait, the tougher they get. Then you have to adopt your cooking to suit the age of the bird. The younger they are, the more cooking options you have.
How long have you been breeding American Breast now?
I'm
10
getting ready
years?
to start season 8.
Oh, 8. How do your birds stack up now to the compared to the birds you started with?
They're a completely different flock. They don't look the same. They don't feel the same. They don't do anything the same other than having those boring old white feathers.
Well, white feathers is not boring. Jeez.
Hey,
White
I
feathers
used to
don't.
get into patterns. I used to nerd out on lacing, and that stuff got complicated. I much prefer to focus on eggs, meat, more birds. It's easier than tracking feathers.
uh, I believe you've got a PowerPoint. You want to
Oh yeah, we can start looking at pictures.
pictures are worth 1,000 words.
So these are 2 point of lay pullets as an example. And that bird on the left, she looks nice and square and boxy in her frame. And right in between the legs there, you can see you could probably fit your fist through there. The bird on the right, longer legged, those legs are tighter together. And this bird is not going to have that underbody width that really presents well in a shrink bag. She has a different body capacity. She's probably not going to be as productive of a layer as the bird on the left. So once they come of age like this and I start looking at them and like that, I keep the bird on the left and the bird on the right. Nobody gets her. She goes with dumplings. That is the best use for a bird like that, is to go ahead and pair her with dumplings. Rip, from your angle, like, what does that kind of structure tell you about either of those birds?
When I see a bird that's wide like that, has that open side to side measurement on the tail, that tells me that that bird's probably got pretty good body capacity. Um, and sometimes you can get width without the length, but usually, uh, if you got a nice wide body on a bird like that, they're going to have really decent uh, body length. Um, because if you don't have good body capacity, you really don't have a chicken. That's the bottom line. And it tells me a lot about the structure of a bird. Um, and to some extent a little bit about the size, because the size or weight of a bird should be coming from the bird's type. Do they have good type? And the fleshing, not just the overall size of the bird. I mean, we can breed tall birds, big birds, overweight birds, but that's not the same as what we really want, at least to my way of thinking. When I see those narrow birds, I think of a bird that is lacking in body capacity, is probably not going to be the best layer in the world, that may have problems laying eggs because she is so narrow. That's a pretty narrow bird there on the right.
Now, if you were looking at it from the top, she had top width. She just didn't get the bottom width. So
Yeah.
you have to look at it from all angles too, because they might trick you from one view.
I like to see a bird, when you look at the body types comparing the two, and that's why I like to look at them from the rear end. So I'm glad you got these two pictures here. But you can see that bird on the left, that her body width carries down from her shoulders all the way to the bottom. But if you look at the bird on the right, you see more of a almost a wedge shape to that body,
Yeah.
which is what you don't want.
I think everything I have for pictures after this is a carcass. So any more questions on the feathered birds?
All right. So before we move on, Thomas Jeffrey wanted to put this out and would like to see what the things are you're speaking of look like in practice. Does anybody have links to what this looks like or looks like in practice, particularly evaluating them by handling them? So can you go into more, Rip and Mandelyn, can you go into more detail when you're holding the bird, a little bit more what you're looking for? Um, you talked about the heft, right? But, and a lot of people don't know how to measure, the depth or the chest capacity or the body capacity of a bird. And there are measurements, right, Rip, that you use, like from the keel bone back to the vent. I think there's some kind of measurement there. I hear people talk about.
Um, Rather than a set measurement, I tend to refer back to the individual breed standards, because it can be different for every breed. Um, Rhode Island Reds are supposed to have a brick shaped body, fairly long, not quite as wide as it is long, but where Mandelyn's bird, uh, I kind of equate them more to uh, the Plymouth Rock style body. They're a little bit shorter. They're they're blocky birds. As far as a resource, I would check out Mandelyn's YouTube channel, Arcadian Orchard, as well as her Facebook page, because she does these sorts of things on a regular basis, and so I know she's got some videos talking about this, uh, and she writes about it extensively. So that's probably the resource I would send them to on that.
Well,
We
I realize the standard, and now we're talking. That kind of goes more into the show side of things.
mm,
I felt like Thomas was like when selecting this dual purpose breed, what we're doing tonight, like, you know, what are we, what kind of capacities are we looking for? Like, you know, so even if it was me, it's like, I know we're going to go into carcasses here next, but, what is a wide back? Because like Mandelyn said, the hen on the right in this picture, this pullet on the right in this picture, to me looks like a leghorn, right? What I knew as a
yeah.
white leghorn, that's what the shape of a leghorn would be, and primarily only really good for egg production. Um, as a kid growing up, if you wanted the most eggs, you got white leghorns. But I don't know, is there any tips or tricks or anything we can help him? I realize there's probably not any links out there that are valuable to help somebody
There's
evaluate.
really not. There's
Right.
really
I
not.
haven't ran into one either.
There's a
So,
good book. It's out of print, but you can download a PDF copy on archive.org, archive.org. And the book is called Call of the Hen, and it will help you learn how to use your hands to evaluate birds. We've also uh, got a video on our Poultry Keepers 360 YouTube channel uh, that I did that talks about how to use your hands to do that. But getting back to the breed standard, to some extent, it's about show, but to a bigger extent, birds were created for a particular person, a particular purpose,
right.
and the standard was written to help breed birds that would fulfill that purpose. And I know Don Schreider has said several times, if you breed a bird to the written standard, then you have a bird that is capable of meeting the purpose for which it was developed. Um, I remember some of the old Rhode Island Reds that I have seen um, that were pretty good layers, and they had reasonably good amount of meat on the carcass. But they were also bred to that written standard.
To me, when I read through the standard, it sounds like the blueprints to build a bird. And when you go feature by feature, like for the American Breast proposed standard, because they're not in the APA yet, they've got quite a bit of work ahead of them before they come anywhere near being in the book. But there's terms like when it talks about the front, it says broad. Okay, well, what does broad mean? To me, it's about finding the birds within the group you're looking at and comparing them to each other and finding those that make you say, oh, yeah, okay, so that's broad. That's a broad bird. And then use that bird to compare the other birds to that one, and then do that trait by trait, and you start to almost form like a puzzle in your mind of what these birds should be. And then I always rely on peer against peer, which helps keep me in line, because if I look at birds that I had 3 years ago and I'm basing it off of what they were then I'm not going to progress much further. If I look at commercial hybrids and try to aim for that too harshly, I'm going to get away from the standard, and I'm going to end up in that dangerous territory of too much too fast, which is a whole other topic, because you can overbreed them. You can totally get somewhere where you shouldn't be. And then you start seeing complications from that. Like the standard's there to keep you balanced.
Yeah, and you hit a key word there: balanced. Um, you want the bird to look balanced in width, in height, in depth of body, in length of back. If you've got one of those areas that looks out of balance with the rest of them, then your bird's going to be off. And Rob posted a question or a comment, said it makes him wonder how many standards work against production qualities. Rob, in all honesty, the reason our standard bred birds are not productive is they have not been selected for that since about 1940 or 1950. Up until that point, standard bred birds were the commercial breeds. There were no hybrids at that point. So, to me, if a bird is bred properly and you're selecting for production qualities, you're going to have a good productive bird. But it's something that you have to select for. It's an ongoing process. It's a real battle. Uh, Production is something that is easy to lose and can be hard
Yeah.
to get back once you've lost it. But Mandy, I think, is a prime example of she didn't have it when she got her American Breast in her birds, but she's worked for a number of years, and her birds, I've seen pictures. Her birds look nothing now compared to what they looked like when she started with them.
It's amazing what you can do in 3 generations, and even more incredible once you get to generation 5. If you really put your head down and focus on what it is you want these birds to be doing and what you want them to look like, and you kind of do that with a ruthless sense of, like, I never go into a season thinking I'm going to retain 100 pellets because I want 100 layers. I'm going to filter and sort and select my way through all the way until they're a year old. And then I'm going to see how many I have left that I actually feel like hatching from. And then I don't have 100 birds anymore. By the time I go through every little thing from how they grew, what they handled like, what their flushing was like, what their growth rate was like, and then when did they come into active lay? Did they make weight when they came into active lay? What was the rate of lay? How long did they stay in active lay? And then after all that, then I look at it and go, well, is it pretty?
Well, and that's the way you should be doing it. That's the way you should be doing it. And the exhibition folks have given a lot of breeds a black eye because that's not what they're doing. They're going for appearance first and with little to no consideration about production qualities. And production qualities are one thing that is highly heritable when you get it going. And you're looking at things, and maybe we'll do a show on this here before too much longer. Things like persistency. How many days in a row does a bird lay an egg? Pause.
Yeah, some of them will start off strong.
Yeah, pause. How many days do they take between laying? You know, it's much better to have a bird that'll lay 4, 5, or 6 eggs in a row and then pause for a day. Well, I've had some birds over the years that would lay 2 eggs in a row and pause for 5 days. You're
Me
never
too.
going to get.
They were Brahmas.
You'll never get good production out of those. So persistency, pause, and the overall production numbers is what you want to look at. Back in the mid to late 20s, they had a program going through the USDA called Record of Production. And they were encouraging farmers to upgrade their flocks there on the farm by using production bred males. If you look up ROP, Record of Production, you can find some information on it. And that did more to set the trend to better production in our birds. And then we kind of lost track of doing that, but which is a shame. You got some. You do have some carcass pictures, don't you, man? Yeah, you do.
Oh yeah, I wanted to get a sneak peek at the next one up so I can formulate a thought about it.
Go for it.
So this is one of the things where I use my hands for evaluations on the living bird, feeling for integrity of the keel. So on the left side is a caved in chest, and when the bird is covered in feathers, you might catch a visual if you know what you're looking for, but you might miss it totally. And you always want to do your selection from far away, get a look at them, watch them, but then you need to get your hands on them so that you don't miss stuff like that, because that caved in chest has a direct correlation to no meat past that divot on the keel. The breast meat fizzles out. It doesn't stay fleshy for the whole length of the keel. It affects the internal capacity and the body capacity because it's pinched up on the back end. That's a keel with problems just from being caved in like that. So on the right side, that keel comes nice and level, straight up and down the bird. The fleshing is true all the way down. And this is stuff that I was working with early. Like this might be from year 2 or 3 when I was sorting out the good from the bad, because the birds I started with, they had problems, but I saw promise in them because of how many of them were decently meaty. But I had to sort and select through a lot of super junky traits of structure flaws like that. I saw keel problems all over the place. Some were squiggly. Some were, I had to straighten out a lot.
Well, and Mandy, you bring up a good point that when you're working to improve birds, it's not an overnight process, you know, and you sort of have to pick your battles of what you're going to work with. If you try, particularly if you're just starting out, if you try to work on correcting more than one thing, 2 if you're lucky, if you think you're going to correct it all in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, that's not going to happen. You know, you'll make better process if you go slower, working on one thing at a time.
I started on keels because that's where the table presentation is. No one's looking at the back of a bird.
True.
once you have them in a shrink bag. And you can't market birds. Excuse me. You can't market carcasses that don't look right. There's no market for them except the dog food market.
Oh, many old-time breeders would tell you that the best poultry breeders eat a lot of their own chickens. Not only is that part of the culling process, but it lets you know what's going on with the bodies on your birds.
Yeah,
Rip,
it tells you.
Rip, how much do you think that is actually still going on out there? I mean, the breeders that I've talked to, and with all the junk that I see people feeding to their birds,
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to eat them. Cat food, fish food. I mean, and it seems like everybody still has a supply of antibiotics somehow, right?
Why? No.
it's got
Even
to be
though they've
expired
been
by now.
outlawed. Well,
Jeff, there's not as much as there was back in the 20s and 30s. Okay.
right.
But there's more than there was within the last 5 or 10 years, I think.
So it's coming up again.
It's coming up again. People are seeing the need, and I get asked these questions on a regular basis. How do I improve production? How do I improve production? And golly, one of the best things you can do is go back and read some of these old historic poultry books, because it's all spelled out in there what they did, the steps they went through, and how they sorted their birds to make these improvements. And then when the hybrid birds came along, that became the poultry to raise. And so then the standard bred birds were kept alive only because folks liked to show them. But again, they lost faith in working on their production abilities.
I think I don't know why people don't eat them, but I agree. There's a revived interest in dual purpose birds.
Yes.
Especially with the homesteading movement picking up steam. But I mean, like the folks I would have met at Ohio Nationals, for the most part, those people are not eating their calls, right?
No.
They're not
No.
putting birds on the table. And it seems like we've gotten away from that. I'm not that much younger than you, Rip. So yeah, I remember, grandma had a flock of chickens, and you never know who had the unlucky day, right? But
for my great grandmother, it was the first cockerel that looked at her sideways on a Sunday afternoon.
Or the one that was easiest to catch.
She'd go out with a pan of feed. She totally cheated. She'd throw down some feed and stand there and talk to him, and then just reach down, grab one right by the neck, and that was it.
Well, that's how you're supposed to do it.
That's right.
She had that swing down to an art. She didn't even need a knife or a cone. She didn't need any equipment. She didn't. She was only 4'11", so she just had to walk out there and not reach too far down to the ground, being as short as she was.
See, I can remember as a child, when my granddaddy, I followed him around on the farm. Part of his right arm went missing in the war, so he just had that one hand, and he would squat down. He was about 5'2" himself. He would squat down and start checking the birds out. Next thing I know, one of them's part of it was here, and the other part was on the ground, and he'd say, "Get that and take it in there to your nanny." And it was what it was.
Okay, next picture. Before we start getting all nostalgic.
Oh, geez.
So these two carcasses, the one on the right is a 14-week-old bird from my breeding, from the original line I started with, because I have branched out and done some scientific line crosses to see what traits can be teased out, what can be influenced through different strategies. I filled the barn up with science projects. And then the bird on the right is from a different farm, and that's kind of similar to where I started, where there was a good broadness to the front of the bird, and then it kind of tapered off towards the backside. And that's pretty common to what the American breasts usually dress out like. But on the left side, that's when you completely lose your mind and hatch as many as you can fit and feed them the best feed you can feed them and totally get ruthless on your selection. That's what it can turn into, which I think is fascinating.
There's no doubt in my mind that genetics plays a big part in that. But the other
It's the
thing,
same genetic pool.
yeah,
Greenfire Farms only imported 3 batches. We are all working with the same limited genetic pool.
The one thing that I think people forget about is that nutrition plays a huge role in how our birds look and perform, and what kind of carcass they produce, the egg production you get out of them. So don't, we're talking about selecting birds, but don't overlook the nutrition component. And, that's something we harp on a regular basis. It can make a big difference in your birds. It really can.
The genetics have to be there. And that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
Mandelyn's proven here, through all of her hard work. But you're never going to see that expressed by feeding common everyday feed, right? And,
True. Very true.
And I think that's why Mandelyn was doing this feeding trial for us earlier this year. And your next one, when does that start, Mandelyn? You're going to compare it to what you used to feed.
Yeah, because that's going to be really telling too. And I've got another 2 weeks on the eggs before they hatch. And I've already got the feed on hand to get started. And then I'll have to make another trip for fresher feed for the changeover from starter to grower. Can't have old feed either.
I think that's going to be a pretty telling.
Yeah, because now we're into the same genetic pool. Now what?
Yeah.
I wonder if it'll look like this on the table again. I'm really curious what it's, it won't look like quite
Spoiler,
like this,
it won't.
No. But,
I think the rest of these pictures are from birds before the feed I tried that you formulated. These are going to be crumble birds coming up.
You had me going there for a minute. I wasn't thinking in terms of feed. I got you now. Carry on.
So this is back when I still had a pretty good flock of Morans, and the breasts, I had them for about a year. I hadn't done much, but as you can see, there's some pretty good meat on those birds on either end. It's just everything else about them was awful, and I was still trying to straighten out keels. But those 2 carcasses actually turned out pretty good. I tried a little side dabble to see if the breast influence would hybridize into the Morans for a meatier carcass. Nope, it didn't change a whole heck of a lot in the F1, so I didn't pursue that. And then on the Morans, you can kind of see where that keel jumps up a bit higher. It's a little more pronounced. Mm-hmm. They still have body width. They still have really meaty thighs. They just don't have that same fleshing in there. And coming from the Morans, I spent, 5 or 6 years with them working on widening them out and getting that growth rate in, because when I first started with the Morans, we weren't processing until after 22 weeks. But I got that to 18 weeks.
The Morans, to me, and I've always felt this, they have large legs and large thighs in relationships to the rest of their body.
Boy, do they.
But a lot larger than some breeds.
So, Mandelyn, when you did the F1 cross, was it a Moran rooster on a breast hen?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I do rely on that female line to bring forth that structure, but it doesn't always pan out. Maybe it was the feed.
No, I was just curious which way you went on the cross.
That could matter.
Yeah, it would. I mean, the hen's going to carry the majority of the traits, right? So, you would hope that the Moran would give you a little bit more length on the overall carcass. The Moran has excellent leg structure. I mean, there's a lot of meat on those legs. It's just lacking in the breast, so it doesn't have that packaged appearance that you're talking about or you like.
It took a while to find that width, though. To tease that width out, I did end up losing a little bit of back length. And I lost everything great about their feathers too, because I was working on the black silver variety, and everything that came up meaty, like I put my hands on that bird and I go, wow, I need to breed from you. It's a shame that you've got all this color leakage and gold feathers where the silver should be, and your comb has 15 spikes.
Be nice to get it all in one package, wouldn't it?
I think it used to be all in one package, but then people started fiddling with it to make it, look pretty for the show.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I think we may have lost Mandy there. She looks like she's frozen.
Uh-oh. She locked up on us.
It's not anything I can do from this end, I don't think, to...
No, she'd either have to log back in. So we had lots of people, like Sue said, her Rhode Island Reds are delicious.
They are.
Yeah. Laura, they eat their culls. They give the smaller birds to a local raptor center. And that's what Rob used to do with his, but he's lost touch with them. So used to give the falconer small birds. Haynes 2-acre hobby, they eat their culls. And they're delicious. They don't even put anything on them, just chicken and water, crock pot and water. So
Make some good stock like that.
I mean, I would be willing to bet that if you have a really good natural feed that's just grains and oats, that would go through. And I mean, it's like when you open a bag of fresh feed, how it smells like you just want to put it in a bowl and eat it. That's got to go through the birds where you don't need the seasoning.
It does.
I would make sense to me.
Yeah.
Mandy is back.
Mandy is back.
Yeah, I lost internet there for a second. I'm glad it came back on. Oh, this next picture I'm excited about. It'll show a lot of body capacity. So these two birds, the one on the left is an American Breese that a friend of mine raised out. She said she wanted to try them, and she said, I want to see if they're really dual purpose, and I'm gonna compare them to Billfelders because I like their color better. So she got the Billfelders, and that bird on the right is how that went.
Big difference.
Yeah, both of them are 18 weeks old, and that's another genetics thing where that breeding selection really comes into play, because if that bird on the right was allowed to go fertilize eggs, you're going to get a whole bunch more of that carcass.
Yes.
The one on the right was really a Breese also?
No, it was a Billfelder.
Oh, Billfelder. Okay.
Second import, if anyone wants to know. First import was better.
But that is a dramatic difference, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's huge. That was over 2.5 pounds difference. And it's hard to say if the Billfelder would have filled in more later, because you do have late blooming birds out there. But I would assume not much change would happen.
Esther wants to know what you feed your early culls to finish them out. She's seen
So
you
there
select
is
your
fancy
bird
French
early.
finishing methods that I don't always do, because they're actually pretty great without doing that.
I think what she means is, like, when you make a selection, say on a 6-week or an 8-week-old bird that's not done yet, are you putting them on a feed just to bulk them out, right?
No, I don't change anything.
Okay, so you're using the same feed all the way through.
Yeah, so as soon as they're on a grower feed, they stay on that feed all the way until you told me to try the finishing feed you formulated for us.
Yeah. Did you try it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got to do it again and see what's different there. It has enough corn in it, but the results were pretty similar to just doing the grower. So I was going to play around with it a little bit and then let you know.
How long were they on the finisher?
4 weeks to 6 weeks.
Okay. And you didn't see any additional carcass fat? You should have
No, it was
seen more
about the
fat.
same.
Okay. There should have been more pad fat. So where you open up for evisceration, all right, to go into the abdomen. There
Yeah.
should have been a larger clump of fat right there at the end of the keel bone. And unfortunately, too many people don't understand you need to keep that. It's part of your
Yes, you need to
flavor
keep that.
profile.
That cooks down to liquid gold.
I know, but too many people remove it and throw it away because they don't understand the value of that. But
There's a genetic component too, and I saw some birds that had it pretty good, and some birds not so much, and some birds they're based on the pen results. Like that's why I'm excited for trial 2.0, because then I can compare pen against pen and then run them through the same methodology, the same feed, the same everything. The only thing different is their specific family. But all of them have been under my breeding guidance for years now. But then I want to get into those little details of how thick was that fat pad. Because when it's, at least a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, that's going to be the juiciest chicken you ever ate.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to remove the fats. People, I don't know, there's still bad publicity out there about fats. But, if you fed them right and you raised them right, that's going to be the healthiest fat you can get your hands on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jeff, didn't you say that if you keep them on a starter longer, you actually don't get more growth benefit from it? You can step that down.
Right. I don't keep them on starter you don't, people think that they're going to grow faster just because they keep them on a higher protein. And really it doesn't work that way. And you're doing damage to like the kidneys and the renal system of the bird. There's no significant advantage to keeping them on that. And again, it depends on where you live, right? What's your weather like, what's your season like. Down in Alabama, where Carrie's at, right now through the summer, if he was trying to grow birds, I might keep them on a higher protein because they're eating less due to the temperature, right? So, we've talked about it before. They're going to eat for the calorie needs based on the temperature, right? And that's all. So there's a time and a place, right? And it's balancing your feed with your weather and your genetics that gets tricky. And we're not going to go into that tonight. But yeah, that's you can, but you shouldn't, right? I mean, in an average climate, not right now, July and August, but in your growing seasons where it's cooler nights, warmer days, there's no need to keep them. There's no advantages to keeping them on a higher protein feed for a longer period of time. You're actually doing more damage to the internals by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're definitely making your chicken house smell a lot more ammonia than it needs to be.
Ready for another picture? This is
Sure.
a neat one too.
All right.
So these birds were both from my breeding. On the left is a Moran's at 16 weeks. And on the right, it's an American Breast that was way too gosh dang wide and out of balance. So he was called for being too much, also at 16 weeks. Fed the same, grown the same, exact same weight, 3 pounds, 6 ounces. But they were completely different body shapes. And so that's where you want to dig into your specific breed standard and see what that standard says so that you can recognize if a bird is within that or not. And so in the case of that American Breast on the right, it was lacking that balance we want to see. It was too much and too far. And that's where I started to see I had to step things back a little bit and start looking more at back length and depth and not just solely focus on width. Because if you pick one trait and you keep selecting repeatedly for that one trait, you're going to go too far with it. You're going to lose the balance. But I thought it was really neat that they were the exact same weight, just different proportions.
Interesting.
I figured I'd bring out a boy that wasn't in a shrink bag. And this guy at 11 weeks old is showing that early width, which lets me know in another 2 to 3 weeks, he would be shrink bag ready. And he's going to have that shape that's marketable. And that's what it looks like. Like if you look at the left side image where his legs are lined up right in the middle of his body, he doesn't have too much mass on either end, he's going to grow into himself pretty well. So that guy actually got a reprieve when it came processing time to grow some more, and let me see how he really finishes out. And that's what the wonky teenagers look like. Plus, I liked his attitude. Friendly without being too friendly.
He's a
We'll see
nice
how he
looking
turns
bird.
out.
Nice looking bird.
He's got a little crinkle in his comb, though, if you really want to nitpick.
Well, you're at the nitpicking stage.
Yeah, I'm starting to nitpick.
Okay. You're starting
That
to
width
nitpick.
is pretty in there. Like, this is another one where I was like, whoa, too wide. That's a bit too much. And that's where those really wide carcass pictures came from, is when I saw those boys like this who didn't grow into it well. Like, you look at that bird and go, that's too wide.
Yeah, that one's starting to look more Cornish cross to me.
Yeah.
Than your birds normally do.
And so when you're doing the selection, you have to look at where can I improve and where do I need to scale that back a little bit. You have to be flexible.
But do you want to just keep one line? At what point do you keep something like this and you start a line for meat production as a primary meat production? Wouldn't there be a demand for that out there? And you advertise them that way, right? These are more for meat production, not for the egg laying side. I'm just thinking of the homesteaders out there who are wanting these types of birds, or people that want to grow their own food. Would they not be interested in these broader birds? I realize
there definitely is a market there and a lot of interest in it, but I don't want to lose the rate of lay, and I don't want to lose what I'm working on, and I don't have a second barn. Because it takes all that space and infrastructure to start off a whole new family of birds.
They did that earlier on with New Hampshires. It was created as a broiler breed, but then it got morphed around to where there was two lines. One was a meat type New Hampshire, and one was a more egg production type New Hampshire. And you could see in some of those earlier pictures, you could definitely see the difference in the body.
Now I'm just trying to aim for that balance of both, because the first focus of my flock is to keep us going in chicken. I'm not trying to buy anymore.
Right.
I want to breed for our own replacements and keep a good thing going without going too far in any which direction.
Well, Mandy, I've told you this before, and I'll just probably keep harping on it forever, but I think you do as good a job as anybody I have ever come across in breeding your birds and selecting wisely for your breeders.
Well, and it took a long time to figure out what it really took, because I've been hatching eggs for a long time. I've been hatching eggs since 1989, but I don't think I really started breeding until after 2012.
Well, we kind of all get there.
Process, it started to make sense, and as I juggled through breeds, because I went through a try 'em all little phase there for a while, and then I finally found the one that stuck, and now they're the only breed I have, which makes it easier too.
Guys, do we have?
Get sidetracked?
I'm sorry. Do we have any more questions? I know we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with them, but
no, I don't think we missed any. I'll look back through. Nope, I think we're in good shape.
Good. Mandy, I do have a loaded question for you. Knowing what you know now, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Or would you?
Well, that is tricky, because on the one hand, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have spent so much time experimenting and wasting my time. But I wouldn't have learned what I know now if I wouldn't have done that. So I don't think I would change anything. I would just, because you got to go through everything and learn it, and you have to apply what you hear, because you can be told 5 different ways to breed a chicken. You can be told 15 different ways to raise a chicken. And until you actually put it into practice with the birds you want to keep and the region that you live with, the resources you have, you don't know what works until you apply it, and it will work for you or it won't. There's some core principles that are the same, but there's going to be a little bit of experimentation to find what works for you and your flock. Besides nutrition, feed them right. You'll probably be all right.
Yeah, but that's even variable based on where you live, right? And
right.
That's
what do you feed them if you live in the desert?
Yeah. Again, I got to know what the temperature and stuff like that is. But, the recipe that I made for Mike Lotzer in Alaska is not the same as the recipe I made for you in, the central states.
He's still doing pretty good, though, with he got a couple of American Breese, and he's seeing that growth rate on that formula you gave him.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's still balanced, but it's balanced for Alaska, right? It's not balanced for, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois. And, people that if people are living in like North Dakota, northern Minnesota, something like that, that feed formulation needs to be adjusted for each region to maximize those genetic potential of each of those birds.
Stu brought up a good mentor really helps when you're breeding birds, and that's pretty true too. And I did have the benefit of my great uncle who let me catch my first chicken, and then he taught me the initial basics of what to do with it after I caught it. And then my grandmother too, she had birds her whole entire life, and her mother before her, and so on and so forth, all the way back to when they came over from Europe. They dragged chickens with them then. But then the newer knowledge from hanging out at APA shows and talking to people who've been doing it 20, 30, 40 years and getting their perspective, and then talking to people who do commercial birds and getting their perspective. I asked around through all different channels of poultry people to figure out where I wanted to fall into that and how I wanted to raise my birds. And I was mentored by a lot of really great people, and that was a lot of great perspective that came from that. So I try to turn around and mentor people too, and that way they can learn at a faster pace than I learned.
A good mentor can shave years off of what you're trying to accomplish. I learned that the hard way.
And it ain't just chickens. So
no, that's true. That's true.
I had a great mentor that got me off and started doing the animal nutrition. And, he had more common sense than book smarts, and it's made a world of difference for my career. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. A good mentor can help you a lot.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Me too.
Okay, I think we've probably about exhausted. You don't have. That's your last slide, isn't it, Mandy?
Yeah, that was the last one.
Okay. I think we've gone through about everything that we had. So, with all of that said,
he's wondering what he'd feed if he lived in the tropics. That's pretty much right, Rob.
yeah.
Fish, plantains, and coconuts. Yeah.
It's amazing how a bird's diet can change and from geographical locations. It's just staggering when you stop and think about it.
That's definitely true.
Well, folks, if you have forgotten, or be sure and check out Mandelyn's YouTube channel, Orchids, not orchids. Sorry.
Apples, not flowers.
There you go. And also, she's got a really good Facebook page. where she posts writes very well. I've always enjoyed reading your writing, Mandy. You do a good job at it. But she's a good person to try to emulate when it comes to poultry.
So long as you're willing to eat a lot of chicken.
You got to like chicken if you're going to raise chickens, that's for sure.
Because one of the worst things, like if you ever want to become a breeder and be public with it and share your birds out, there's going to be some birds that probably shouldn't leave the farm. No matter how good a quality you get flock wide, there's going to be some they probably shouldn't go outside of a shrink bag.
Yes.
Because reputations, they're hard to get, and they can disappear pretty fast if you let the wrong birds out to the wrong person, and then now people are selling birds using your name, and they're terrible because
And it ruins your reputation when they do that. It's not a good thing. So, with that said, I think we can call it an evening. Kerry, do you have anything you want to add? Jeff?
I'm good.
No, I learned a lot. And I was really impressed by the pictures. Where the American breast was when she started to, now it's getting a lot more of. I don't want to compare it to the Cornish cross, but the breast is much more developed. Okay, the breast is much more rounded and developed. It has a very good look, and in a shrink bag. So it's, just keep on. I'm really anxious to see how the next feed trial goes. See
Me
what
too.
we learn from that.
But that's
especially
be
after
cool.
working the kinks out.
Yeah. Do you know how much feed you had in these, Mandy? Did you ever figure out?
Once I run the tally, I will know exactly how much.
Okay. Well,
it's written down in a pile of notes that I need to put in a spreadsheet.
We're waiting with bated breath.
I know.
Especially me.
I can't imagine why.
Oh, mercy. Mandy,
Mandy,
Angela.
Mandy, I think what you should do is take one of those that once it's in a shrink bag and deep freeze it and then overnight it to Jeff just so he can see for himself.
Yeah.
Do I have to pack it with dry ice or no?
Just let it thaw. If you get it frozen hard enough, right? I mean, if you get it really frozen hard and you put it in like an insulated chipper and, 2-day it or overnight it, it'll be fine.
I get requests for that from people who go, I want to try it before I, completely change everything I'm doing with poultry. Let me try this bird. See if I even like it first.
Sell them.
Oh, and I have a bone saw to cut one in half. Frozen. Right. That would show me that.
Would, yeah. That would make a good visual.
Yeah, I forgot about that bone saw. I have it for pork, just by the way.
It works on chickens just as good.
I'll have to have my husband hold it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a fun evening, a very educational evening. We hope that you'll come back in 2 weeks when we'll do it all over again with another program or something. We'll come up with something fun. We always do. So until then, keep enjoying your birds, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye, y'all. Have a good night.